EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin. He's dedicated his career to public service, including 22 years in the U.S. Army, 4 years in the New York Senate, and 8 years in the U.S. House of Representatives before he was confirmed as the 17th administrator at the United States Environmental Protection Agency. So please help me welcome Administrator Lee Zeldin. So welcome. I think it would be an understatement to say that people are really looking forward to having you here today. And we're so grateful that you were able to find some time. And I'd like to start with just a couple of questions to more broadly introduce you to our audience. And first of all, thank you for your service in the military. After that, in your time in the Senate and in Congress, what's a nice guy like you doing over at EPA?
The president called the Sunday morning after the election, and he was all in on EPA. And I told him, Mr. President, if you like it, I love it, let's go. When the president had called, he shocked me at just how many very specific goals he had for EPA. And I don't know what the nature of his conversation was with all of the other people he was calling to ask to head up agencies and join his cabinet. But if he was going into that level of detail with everyone, that's amazing, because he went into an extraordinary amount with EPA. Now, he comes at it with the perspective of as a career builder. There was a very heavy focus on an understanding of how EPA very much has many powers to slow things down. And that also means the EPA has tremendous power to speed things up. And Trump speed is a very real thing inside of this administration. We saw it in responding to the LA wildfires. The president often talks about it in the context of permitting and the desire for more permitting reform. He wants to unleash energy dominance. There's work with regards to hoping to make America the AI capital of the world. I understand where I am, but I'll also reference that he was focused on the American auto industry, and these were many of the specifics that were referenced. We can't lose sight of our core mission, protecting human health and the environment. The president has spoken in the past about pursuing clean air, land, and water for all Americans. One of the big differences is that we don't feel like this is a choice, that we can either protect the environment or grow the economy. The big difference, and it was implemented starting on day one, the moment the president was sworn back in, was that we choose both. We choose to protect the environment and grow the economy, and that, of course, is very relevant to this group.
Absolutely, and certainly we know you serve all of American taxpayers. Did you realize, though, when you first went into the agency, how much of an impact you were going to have on rural America specifically?
There were a lot of issues that were all over my radar, especially from my time serving in Congress for 8 years. But I will say that there have been a whole bunch of other issues that have emerged since I've been in, or issues that were on my radar I knew about. I knew that we were going to have to make decisions on, where there's a whole other level of depth and appreciation for the amount of decisions to be made and the significance to help. So as soon as in my first 9.5 months as EPA administrator, I went to all 50 states, and a lot of that travel brought me to farms. It was a lot of meetings with different types of farmers. I heard a lot of stories about diesel exhaust fluid and tractors that are breaking down in the middle of a harvest. I heard about the desire to have right to repair better defended. A lot of talk about ethanol and biofuels, especially based on certain travel that I'd have. Impact of pesticides and the as we're going through the development of the MAHA agenda, the desire for so many members of the agriculture community to be heard, to make sure that their voices were present, posing the question, well, if we were to just get rid of every single pesticide that exists, well, what are we going to do about that disease, germ, weed, bug that is going to be present on my property. The feedback as I was traveling, it was a whole other level of, I guess, depth and breadth. But I had an idea going in that I was going to be doing a lot of ag work. I very much welcome it. I enjoy it. Even though I was representing a congressional district in New York, believe it or not, the first congressional district of New York on the east end of Long Island has a ton of not just ag history, but current farms that are that it was important to represent. WOTUS wasn't some new topic that I'm just learning about now as EPA administrator. We've been living it for a very long time, and we want to get it right. So I have very much enjoyed the ag aspect of this position. I will say that broadly across the agency, I didn't realize just how much impact we can make every single day. And I've really enjoyed this position because I will wake up tomorrow, I will go into EPA headquarters and just make decisions all throughout the day. I mean, I just came from a meeting where we're deciding on a rule that the Office of Water is now going to be completing, and then I'll be signing. And when I leave here and I go back to my office after this discussion, I'll be having another meeting with another program office on another decision to be made. And while we are most proud that on the first day, on the 1 year anniversary of President Trump getting sworn in office, on the 1 year anniversary, we released a list of our top 500 environmental actions that we took over the course of that first year. That's what we're most proud of. I will add, though, on top of it, that at EPA, we will do more deregulation in 1 year than entire federal governments have done in the past across all federal agencies, across entire presidencies. So there's also that opportunity to be able to right-size the agency, to be able to have more accountability over the funds, to do an agency-wide reorganization, to make sure that this agency is working as effectively as possible. And I will say, while it's very important that I'm following the law, that I'm fulfilling all of my statutory obligations, in many ways, the administrator had given himself or herself in the past more powers than the law was providing the administrator. And the Supreme Court decision in Loper-Bright and overturning the Chevron doctrine and requiring the best reading of the law, or West Virginia versus EPA in the major policies doctrine, and in ensuring that trillions of dollars of regulation aren't just done by rogue agency bureaucrats, but instead debated and voted on by Congress, I also pursue ways to reduce my power every single day, and in a way that reduces the power of whoever follows me. And I'm not doing that to weaken environmental protections. I'm doing that to follow the best reading of the law. And my message to Congress is, if you want us to regulate the heck out of something in particular that you're upset to see that I'm not regulating the heck out of, well, then introduce a bill, have a debate, have a vote, because this is the United States of America, and we should not have agencies hoarding that level of power creatively where the power is not given to them by federal statute.
Well, obviously, that's a lot of work in just a short amount of time since you've been administrator. I want to drill down into a couple other just policy areas, and then we'll take some questions from the audience that are starting to come in as well. Thank you for submitting those on Slido. Just if you step back and think about the biofuels policy that we have in the United States, how do you view the strategic importance of that? Is it because it's an economic driver in rural areas? Is it a national security asset that we have alternatives to only petroleum-based? Is it a controversy between a lot of different competing interests that take up a lot of your time? If you had to describe U.S. biofuels policy now, how would you do that?
A lot of competing interests to take up a lot of my time. That's a good way of putting it. We're going through the very final stages of finishing and releasing RFS Set 2, and there are multiple dials to that decision, as you all well know even more than I do. And the stakeholder input that we received throughout that process was very diverse. And I wanted to be able to solicit all of that feedback. I want to consider all of that feedback, and we want to get it right. I've had conversations, many conversations and meetings with members of Congress. Obviously, this is a very important issue to many members of Congress, and Congress's ability to legislate solutions, amendments, next bills to take so many different decisions off of the whim of the head of an agency, and instead just allow me in the process to just follow statute as simply as possible. That's really important. I mean, I came in and right away you have one request from 8 state governors that we have to make decisions, and we had to make a decision on, and you have the emergency fuel waivers, and you have the small refinery exemptions, 175 requests we inherited. This massive backlog on SREs, and then we had RFS Set 2, which, as you all know, was a deadline that was blown past before I had even gotten in. This was November of 24. This should have been done, and so our goal here is not just to get RFS Set 2 done, but we will instantly be moving on to RFS Set 3. And we want to ensure that all of you have a certain level of certainty and predictability where you know where we're going by that next deadline that is in front of us, as opposed to just assuming or worrying with great frustration that the next deadline is going to come and go. Congress is deciding whether or not to have E15 year-round. To answer the first part of your question, well, when you're spending time with Senators Grassley and Ernst and all of those senators, and the congressman from Adrian Smith, and so many with that delegation, and Randy Feenstra, and the list goes on of all those members we've had these conversations with. Quite frankly, they view it as an economic issue and a national security issue. You have a lot of other members of Congress, as you were talking about in that very great point of the competing interests. You have a lot of members of Congress who represent other parts of the country, and they have different views, different constituencies that they represented. I represented a different constituency on this issue on the east end of Long Island, but the president has been very outspoken and consistent with his message to the heart and middle of America on where his position is. And my job as EPA administrator is to implement that vision and that commitment. That is why we granted the waiver request of the 8 state governors. That's why we granted the emergency fuel waivers, and continuing to do that as we were doing the analysis. And right now we're finishing up this RFS Set 2, which is going to be released soon. But it's hard for me to choose between the economic argument that's being advanced most strongly, or the national security argument that's being advanced most strongly, or the diversification aspect of it. Because I would say with the members of Congress and the stakeholders who have reached out to me, they bring great passion to every aspect of their advocacy.
So we have continued to hear that we'll have imminent announcements. I was hoping maybe you wanted to break a little news today, but is soon, like Friday, this week, next month?
Before the end of the month.
All right, thank you so much for that.
It narrows it, right? Because it's, December 23rd right now, so.
Yeah, that does.
Getting pretty close. That's pretty imminent.
That's great to hear. A lot of folks waiting for that, and waiting for more action on E15 as well. That doesn't seem to be going quickly through Congress. And that kind of leads me to my next question, in which, when you have these discussions with members of Congress, we've had this RFS around for 26 years. Are they talking about, well, maybe it's not quite set up right? Is there any discussion about redo or think differently about how we incentivize biofuels?
When they went through the last appropriations process, and there was a decision made to then go more deliberately and deeply into a negotiation on trying to get year-round E15. I started to have conversations with members of Congress who were representing different constituencies, where instead of them being individual conversations, which is really the nature of how that had gone from the moment I was confirmed until about 2 months ago, the conversations over the last couple months now have been taking place where the members representing the different constituencies are part of the same conversation. As far as where Congress is going on this, it's best answered by the members of Congress who will be here today. They can give you probably better insight as to where they are as of now. I can share from my perspective that this was the first time, the last couple months, it's the first time that we're having that deep dive with the multiple parties represented at the table, and that's a very good thing. I found during my years in Congress, the best way that Congress gets anything done is when they operate on a deadline. They just have to get something done by a particular date, and then if that date gets relieved, like the oxygen in the room, it disappears, and people move on to the next topic and they stop thinking about it. So my only advice from the outside, and as far as your engagement with Congress, is when you have momentum and there is urgency to get something that is very important to you done, that is not a moment to take your foot off the pedal. It's a moment to really lean into it, to punch something over the finish line, because in a moment's notice, all of a sudden they can move on to something else. And as I mentioned, like the oxygen in the room just kind of, it changes, and you've lost your moment. When I was meeting with the members of Congress, I talked to them about the different dials that were involved in the RFS Set 2 decision. Whether you're talking different levels that get set, biomass-based diesel, the decision on discounted RINs, the decision on I guess there was about 4 dials that we had. Each of them, the reallocation was another aspect. Each one of these dials, depending on where they are, will make one stakeholder group happier than another. And if you're having a conversation, you could talk about just the high level top line point of whether or not to have year-round E15. But I don't think it's a good idea to approach that discussion naive at all to what moves all of the individual stakeholder groups, because you're trying to get votes with a very tight margin in the House, a very tight margin in the Senate, unique constituencies between the two chambers. And I feel like the negotiation for them, the conversation, should be done aware of what is going to move all these individual groups if you're actually trying to punch it over the finish line.
We had part of that conversation on our open mic podcast this week with Steve Sensky, who represents the soybean growers, about, let's think about E15 carefully for what it means for all sectors. So I certainly understand your point. Let's switch to pesticides just a little bit, because that's another big area for EPA, and certainly impacts everybody that not only produces food but eats. I know that you've had conversations about deregulations. The question that came in from the audience, and also one I had, is about expediting a review of crop protection tools. We see what's happening in one country that's become one of our biggest competitors, that is Brazil, where they are going at warp speed compared to most other countries in terms of advancing registrations on pesticides and biologicals. What's happening within your agency now to speed up registrations?
So speaking of backlogs, the pesticide review backlog when I came in was 14,500, which is wild to wrap your mind around. The good news is that the backlog is now down to 8,500. We've made tremendous progress. We have added IT investments. because the system would just go down for days at a time and just everything would shut down. We've added scientists and others to that office. So while we did an agency-wide reorganization, and the size of the agency went from over 16,000 to 12,500, which, by the way, saves about $750 million a year for the taxpayers, that Office of Chemical Safety went up 175 with the reorg. Those two aspects, the investment in IT as well as increasing bandwidth with personnel, it was key to being able to reduce the backlog from 14,500 to 8,500. We will continue to work on going down. We didn't want to just show up and just like magically make the number go from 14.5 down to 0. That would have been actually pretty darn irresponsible of us. We want to improve. I want the agency to always pursue, especially now, improving communication with the public. Like, I go onto the webpage and I visit some of these pesticide pages or other chemical pages, and they're technical, and they don't tell the full story in a way that best connects with the average American who might be going onto a webpage to get answers to basic questions, and I have a problem with that, and millions of other Americans have a problem with that. When we talk about using best available science, and when we talk about using the gold standard science, my message internally to our agency, and it needs to be our message externally to the public, is that if you have a study that even if it's an anomaly, even if it's just one study out of thousands that show a narrative that is totally different than what the rest of the other studies show, you don't ignore that study. You have to actually lean into explaining why that study is right or wrong, whether you're ignoring it or not. Talk about the methodology and the sample size and the exposure levels and whatever other information that the public might be referencing. Because if we make a decision because there's 3,000 other studies that say something else, that say that something is safe, and there's one study or there's 30 studies that show something different, I don't want to ignore those studies. And I feel like the agency has done that in its communications in the past, and it leads to more distrust of government, distrust of the decision, and it makes your lives harder when the agency isn't doing the best job possible in communicating what we know. So I want to put on the webpage, even if it's one study that's an anomaly, the sample size is 50, and they're using rats instead of humans, and the exposure levels are assuming that you're basically injecting the pesticide or doing shots of it or whatever. Like, whatever is flawed with the study, I don't want to ignore it. I want to put it on the webpage and say, well, the reason why our decision is not in line with what this study finds is because this is what is wrong with that study. And the MAHA community, a lot of moms and dads who are out there, they want to make the right decision as parents. And they have questions, and if you go to the government and the government does not answer your question, you're forced to figure out transparently answering your question. You're forced to find other ways to get answers. And I think too often in the past, the government has been responsible for that breach of trust and transparency, and I want to be able to reverse it. So, very important topic. We're working our way through the backlogs. We've made decisions that have improved bandwidth in different ways to be able to get through it. We're working hard on following the law. We speak about why pesticides are used. We will talk about where there isn't an alternative or where there is. We'll talk about risk remediation and mitigation and ways to help guard against risks to workers or the environment or to the general public. And we face that in a way with the dicamba decision. And the courts had invalidated dicamba a couple of times, and this decision was in front of the agency. We put forth a decision that was very urgently done in response, especially to cotton farmers in the South who had started their growing season, and they needed an answer. And one possibility is we could have done an approval for just 1 year. What does that do for the market, for those that would be providing the dicamba products? Maybe that's not enough certainty to make the investment. So we ended up doing a 2-year approval, but it's not just a 2-year approval to get through the season for cotton farmers in the South. It's an approval that was going through the summer months of 2027, and we then lean into explaining it to the public very transparently. I mean, you could go read our press release on dicamba that we put out, and we had people who are very passionate MAHA activists who appreciated, after they read the press release, they understood why the decision was made. They understood a lot more of how the decision was made. And now it's very important for the farmers who are using it to follow those risk mitigation procedures, because you'd really be ruining it for everyone if there was some farmer out there that decided, I'm not going to do any of this, and they start causing all this damage to all sorts of other neighbors, by the way, also in many cases in agriculture. And then we're right back to square one. So at the end of the day, we could put out guidance, we could put out a label, we could put out instructions, we can help with education, but it's really up to the farmers and how the application's done.
You mentioned MAHA, and one of the other pesticide products that has become so controversial is glyphosate. There seems to be a lot of people who are appreciative of the fact that you are going to be reviewing this again, and that perhaps there'll be some other things that come out of this. I know it's been studied so much over the years, but when you read the MAHA comments that have come out just about the administration's defense of glyphosate currently, you'd think there's no room for interpreting any science. It's my way, or we're either for it or against it. Do you see any way of breaking that down to where people can have a science-based conversation on glyphosate that can remove some of the emotional ties that are currently attached?
We certainly have to do our best to try. We're going through a review right now. I haven't told my Office of Chemical Safety what I want their review to show. That's not how it works. We have dedicated career scientists who have been there for 20, 30 years. Many of them, by the way, have been studying this for a long time. They're very, very familiar with the science. They're going to do their review, and then I'm going to communicate their findings with the public. And I don't want to tell them at this stage of the review, politically, this is what I want your findings to show. The gold standard science is the gold standard science. The studies show what the studies show, and at the end, we need to do the best possible job communicating it with the public. There's a term that MAHA activists use. They say radical transparency. I actually, I like the term. I like the idea of us being as transparent as possible. I'm not in this position because I needed a job. I'm not doing this for the pay. We're here to serve, and there are people in elected office. I happen to be a supporter of term limits. My personal opinion is you come in, you bring your ideas, your energy, you try to make a difference, and you move on. I did 8 years in the House. I felt like that was the right amount of time for me. Others stay there for a heck of a lot longer. For me, during my time in this position, I'm not trying to hold anyone's water in a case like you're asking about glyphosate, to put out a result of a review that is skewed from whatever the actual scientific review is going to show. I want my team to be empowered to study everything that is out there, and then my charge to them is to be fully transparent with the public. And I feel like I wouldn't be serving the public to be doing anything differently. I'm going to, I don't know, I came to this position the end of January of 2025. It's been a privilege to serve in this position over the course of the last 14 months. At the end of the day, it's about following the law. It's about fulfilling statutory obligations. It's in this particular case, it's not about whoever speaks the loudest or rallies the loudest. Our farmers are the backbone, the engine of our economy. It is a matter of national security. It is how we feed our entire country. We need to have the healthiest, most robust food supply possible. And I know, I've seen it, I've heard it from our farmers directly, how much they care about the environment, how much they want to do right. They want to be informed with the best possible decision and excel. And I want to help empower that in the most appropriate, productive, positive way possible. And in this case, that means our team does their scientific review, and whatever those findings are, we communicate them to the public.
Well, thank you, Administrator Zeldin. That is just wonderful to have you here. And let's give him a big round of applause for all of his.